think he was 11, and he appeared in the dock, and a magistrate turned to him and said, "Mr. So-and-so, do you know why you're here?" And his response was, "Oh, I'm a criminal, sir," and he's 11. I kind of fell into it in the early part of, I think it was February 1986, so I'd finished my degree in 1984, and it was early 1986 when I joined the ALS. And the interview panel for the job was Paul Coe, Duncan Cahoon Kerr, as he was then known, who'd just come down from Papua New Guinea after working there. And they said they were looking to employ more women at the ALS because they were aware that it was a bit of a male-dominated culture, and they were trying to get women into the ALS to try and, I guess, soften up the place and hopefully bring in some of the women clients as well. The other thing that they were looking for was they'd recently established a civil law unit, and they were looking to employ, and a family law unit, or they were about to establish a family law unit. So they recruited myself into the civil law unit, Helen Campbell and Margaret Hearps into the family law unit. So I think they were the first family lawyers who started at the ALS then. The civil law unit that I moved into, which was headed up by Bernard Brazel, was basically Bernard and myself, had been set up mainly through, and this is my understanding of it, mainly through funding that had been obtained as a result of an inquiry into asbestos mining at Baryugal. And the ALS was running a number of asbestosis claims against James Hardy. They thought what they could do was expand the service to do, all sorts of other civil law matters, to basically deal with poverty law issues that were impacting on Aboriginal people. So things like, motor vehicle accidents, tenancy issues. We did, I think one of my first cases was a dog act prosecution. Someone's dog had bitten someone else, so we were, representing them. All sorts of, stuff that was coming in through the door. I'm not sure how it changed, but somewhere along the line I ended up doing court work. So I ended up doing quite a bit of care work, a lot of children's court work, and ordinary crime, duty rosters and that sort of thing, all in the Sydney metropolitan area. But I spent an awful lot of my time going down to Mildura looking after kids. It was just completely eye-opening. Not a clue. I'd gone to school, we had books, history books, which talked about settlement. The books talked, they had the sort of traditional pictures of Aboriginal people with the spears and the whole bit, and then they disappeared. And that was all that I knew in terms of what I'd been taught at school. So, yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opener, to say the least, to be completely surrounded by Aboriginal people, to have to rethink all of my ideas about culture and ways of doing things, which I actually found really, really exciting. But I loved learning what I learnt from people. The field officers were great. Field officers were Russell Reid, and I think Lyle Munro was a field officer for a bit. He had different roles there. Lyle Munro Jr., sorry. Skull, Phil, he was there for a bit. Nolene Lever, who was the only female field officer there and used to do a bit of work in women's prisons. Russell was probably the person I had the most to deal with, and look, Russell was good, he was a character, but he taught me a lot, and he took me on board and looked after me, and gave me a hard time as well sometimes, but I think he saw that as his job. And the staff, there were great staff like Shirley Pearce, Shirley Lomas. I became very, very close with Shirley, and we've been in contact over the years. Kelly Abraham's worked there. It's mainly Shirl, I think, that I had a lot to do with. But I did a lot of work at Mildura. And and I got to know the kids quite well. I'd I used to have a little yellow Volkswagen, and on court day I'd go and drive down the block, honk the horn, you know, yell out for whoever was going to court that day. There were usually a few other kids who'd all squash into the back who didn't have court on that day but probably had outstanding matters, so we'd, you know, shove them all in the back, go off to court in the little yellow V-dub, and then sort of unload everyone, you know, who's got matters on, who's got, you know, failures to appear or whatever it might be, you know, work through it all. Take the half a dozen or whatever back, you know, next week you'd be back down the street, honk honk, because, you know, they had no way of getting there, and, you know, they needed to have time to have a shower and all that sort of stuff, so it was good to kind of do that and get them ready. And it was the same group of kids who were started off doing bag snatches, and then it kind of, you know, graduated over the years to more serious stuff, and I think about half of them have passed away as a result of drugs, unfortunately, and the other half probably ended up in jail. And you know, I sort of think about them to this day and think, you know, whatever happened to so-and-so, and you see some of the families on the telly sometimes, you know, and think, oh yeah, you know, so-and-so's still around. Most of the magistrates were good. None of them wanted to see these kids coming back in front of them over and over and over again. You could sense the frustration about try to find things for kids to do, try and get them engaged in schooling. I don't think any of these kids went to school beyond primary school, if that. Their housing situation might often be unstable. You could see the waves of drugs moving through the community, and then watch how that would impact on kids individually and groups as a whole. So you'd be watching them all get into yarny, and then next thing you know, amphetamines would hit the block, and then all the kids were taking amphetamines, so they'd be going right off, you know, their rockers and getting into stuff that they, you know, that was kind of getting a lot more serious. And then of course heroin hit, and that was just dreadful what it did to the community. And as I say, I had a number of kids, you know, who I appeared for quite a few times who died from heroin overdoses. There was, I think, 4 that happened in a matter of weeks. I remember a human rights and equal opportunity inquiry that was held on the block. I think it was to talk about race discrimination, and we decided to get some kids from the block, because we had a thing called the Youth Action Group. Shane and myself and Shane Brown from South Sydney Youth Service, we set up a thing called the Youth Action Group, and all the kids had badges, and we got money, I think, from the Arts Council to have dance activities and stuff like that. And the idea, you know, maybe call it naive, but it was kind of based on the whole Malcolm X thinking of self-determination and pride in being black and all that stuff. So we, you know, got the kids to meet with people from their favourite bands, like Public Enemy. When they came out to Australia, you know, we'd get them along, and they'd get free tickets and all this sort of stuff. And anyway, so we got a few kids from the Youth Action Group, because we thought they should talk about what life's like on the block and what goes on. And they were really brave little kids. They got up, you know, what it's like living here. And then we got the commissioners to go out, and whilst the whole inquiry was happening, we just watched the coppers going around the block and time them, and then walked back into the inquiry and said, they've gone around 7 times in whatever it was, an hour and a half. And, you know, for what reason? Just to be dickheads, really. And I also used to teach photography down on the block to the kids. That was part of the Youth Action Group thing. I'd teach photography, and also to South Sydney Youth Service, to the kids down there. And I'd go around with my camera photographing life in Redfern, and Shane would say, here, take a photograph of this, take a photograph of that, and heaps of photos of the police driving around the block, just to give that. I think I did it wasn't a DVD because they didn't exist then. I did a video tape which compiled my photos. You know, it was like a day in the life of a kid in Redfern, just showing, you know, just visual images of what it was like, and this kind of ever-present police presence. You know, when were they going to raid the block again? They'd scoop up a few people. They probably, you know, had, you know, the odd bag of yardy, and that was about it. But these massive raids that used to go on, and still go on, as I understand it, in communities. I think we had the tactical response group used to do a lot of practice work on the block. So they'd go in, they'd raid little old ladies, you know, forced up in the middle of the night, all that sort of stuff. Still goes on. So yeah, I think they kind of backed off the hotels a bit, but there was just that continual harassment that just went on all the time, and there was always an excuse, there was always a reason. The thing Shane wanted to get across was that, and I thought it was a really good point, and I hope I was able to convey that, was people just trying to live their lives. There were families on the block just trying to raise their kids, live their lives, do what other people do, but in this environment, where you have this continual police harassment and kids not feeling safe going outside of Redfern because they'd be stared at or accused of being criminals or, whatever. And so a lot of the photos I took were, the elders sitting in their kitchen having a cup of tea, families holding their kids, showing nice images, men cuddling their babies and nice stuff, not the usual kind of, I don't know, whatever. I suppose angry black was the thing, that people were sort of thinking about then, particularly because it was the time of the bicentennials. And joined the Royal Commission, and I was very lucky to work there with Hal Wootton and John Mackenzie and Bob Belair and Steve Norrish, and a range of fantastic people over the next 3 years. From the profiles that we did of those who died, whose deaths we investigated at the Royal Commission, you could always see it was like a train that was unstoppable. From the time you sort of look at their situation as a kid, you could see, oh look, there's removal or some sort of, significant family situation this kid is living in, and then just the kind of the progression, the inevitable progression. And it's not unstoppable. There's got to be points along the way. I remember at one point myself, Liesl and Les Morgan, who were the youth workers with the AMS, we made a pact with Shane Phillips that we were going to get this bunch of kids out who'd been regulars at Bajura. We were going to get them out for Christmas, the whole lot. Because most of them had spent every Christmas, these were only teenagers, they'd spent every Christmas since 12, probably incarcerated. So we made a pact, we were going to keep them out. I think we even might have said it to the magistrate, Mr Blackmore, the chief magistrate or senior children's magistrate of the Children's Court. This is our aim. We're going to get these kids out, they're going to have Christmas at home, the whole lot, not just, one or two of them, the whole shebang, and we'll have a Christmas party and the whole thing. And we did it. We actually managed to achieve it. I don't know how, because, you could just see the pressure building up, suddenly criminal charges just before Christmas. Oh no, so-and-so's going to be refused bail. It happened, they got Christmas, straight after Christmas, bang, all slowly back inside again. So I suppose in some ways that was a positive that we, managed to keep them out, but then, there goes the train again. The train's running away again and you're kind of trying to stop it. Another moment which I remember, which was one little kid who was one of those, the first time I ever saw him, I think he was 11, and he appeared in the dock at Bajura Children's Court. Nobody knew why he was there. A little tiny thing, and a magistrate turned to him and said, Mr So-and-so, do you know why you're here? And his response was, oh, I'm a criminal, sir. And he's 11, and that's his response. And he was one of the regular group. And you're just watching this little tiny thing, growing up, and I don't know how many court appearances he would have had during his time as a teenager, but that was just, you thought, this can't be, he's labelled himself, it can't be that this has to happen this way. There's got to be some breaking points where you can sort of intervene and stop it from happening. I remember saying to one kid, it was his brother, who, just before he got onto heroin, who was really good at photography, and we kind of used to, stand there quietly doing photographs in the dark room. He didn't say much, as most of the kids, most of the boys didn't say much. And I remember trying to say to him, you don't have to go this way. And you could see that he was really trying. He was a smart kid. He really didn't want to go the same way as his uncles. And next thing you know, he was on heroin. And, again, I wonder what happened to him. But you could just see that I thought, there might be a chance. There might be a chance that he can just somehow turn it around. But you just felt like the wave of the system was just kind of going to keep coming in this kid's face.